Okay, I'm going to give you just a couple of tips on what I think we can do personally to address this social media cultural takeover. Thanks for tuning in. So if you didn't watch my video on social media and its effects, check it out. Just the last video that I shot. So the stew pot in my brain and stuff that I've been thinking about in terms of how we can address the changes in culture that are happening. So one way to think about it would be, okay, basically, to sum it up, social media breeds a narcissistic culture. So if we can think in terms of what do people need when they leave a narcissistic relationship, meaning, they get out after being a significant other to somebody with narcissistic personality disorder. In that context, what are the things they need? And how then can we foster those things in our culture, in ourselves, really? So, a couple of observations. Now, they're way more than this, but once somebody gets out, and once they kind of get their bearings a little bit, so I'm not talking about in the immediate crisis, chaos, topsy-turvy, is that up or down kind of space that somebody is in when they leave a narcissist, in my observation. What I'm talking about would be once there's a little bit of traction, right, and somebody gets their sea legs and gets a little bit back. I mean, it's a process, right? It also depends on how long they were hooked up with a narcissist, right? But in my observation experience, once, they're able to stand on the deck without falling over into the sea. In that space, often there are a couple of things that come up for someone in that situation. Number one, tremendous need to be heard, to be listened to be validated. And if you think about our culture, this is something that's missing. Many people in our culture are looking for a listener. They don't always know it, but they are. And I think some of the time we can sit in that space. We can be a person who listens, legitimately listens. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to fix anything. You don't have to solve anything necessarily. Just listen. There's a quote, and I don't have the book in front of me, so I cannot remember the exact quote, but it's in the book Healing Through the Dark Emotions by Miriam Greenspan. And she talks about how being authentically and truly listened to is sometimes, there are points in your life where that's more important than food. And especially in the context of trauma. I mean, I see that all the time. People who have experienced trauma need to be listened to, need to be truly heard. And we shut down listening in different ways, honestly. On the part of the listener, you can shut it down. You can communicate that you're not present and that you're not listening by doing a few of the above. Thing number one you can do is you can be thinking about your response to what they're saying while they're talking. You're not present. To be present and to truly listen, in my experience, is to listen with your entire being. It's not just your ears. Your whole body listens. And you're tuned in to what they're saying. And sometimes you feel stuff in your body if you're on that level listening. And that's I think it's a gift. It's an amazing thing that we can give to people if we can do that. Because no longer is the trauma exclusively theirs. It is shared. It is the energy of the trauma is shared. And so we help carry their burden. And that's an amazing thing to do for another person. So but we have to listen in that way. I mean, there's a book. Hope I'm getting it right. The author's name, I think it's Paula Kaplan who wrote it, but it's called When Johnny and Jane Came Marching Home, and it's about veterans, military veterans, and their experience being off in war or in combat. And in this book, she makes the argument for the fact that when you've experienced that trauma, you need the space to talk about it. You need a safe space to be heard, to be listened to tell the story of what happened. And that's not happening in our culture. This is partly why I think PTSD is so common. Because there's no, and PTSD really on some, like in terms of military combat, it's, if you think about it, it's normal to be affected, tremendously affected by something traumatic. To not be affected is the pathology. But yet PTSD gets labeled as, oh, they're not able to reintegrate or adjust to civilian life. It's a problem. No, they need to tell their story. They need somebody to listen to their story. And to be able to talk about it, to talk about how they felt, to be back in their own body and experience what they felt. And it's not happening. It doesn't, even in the context of the mental health model, it doesn't happen very often. I think of the book, on this front, I think of the book by Tim O'Brien that everybody should read this book, actually. It's one of my favorites. But it's about war. It's a collection of short stories called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and he describes, it's fictitious, but he describes, has these short stories about the Vietnam War. And in it, what's cool about it is there's one particular story that he tells over and over again, this experience. And I remember as I read the book, thinking, you already told this story. Wait, you're telling this story again? You told this story. You told this story. And finally, later, at some point in the book, he tells the story. And when you read the story for this particular time, at least this is my experience of it, you finally feel the story in your body. And then you realize, up to this point, he hasn't told you the story. He tells you the story when you feel it in your body. You finally get it. That's, I think, a good picture of what listening, the kind of listening we need to be engaged in our culture, in trying to offer to combat the narcissistic social media frenzy that isolates, that separates, that causes us to be detached from other people, but yet have this fake felt sense that we are attached because we can instantly pull them up on our phone and message them via some app or like their photo on Facebook or etc. I mean, there's this, it's the combination of this fake technical connection that is largely unreal. And in that context, the absence of true connection. So part of the way we can get back to true connection is to be engaged in the real world, listening on a real level to other people. And, to not be on the date and looking at your phone perpetually, or at the Christmas party looking at your phone. To put it down and not allow it to perpetually interrupt real, authentic living. That's thing one that I think would help. Thing two would be, kind of ties into that, but just to be more authentic, to move in the direction of being authentic, right? Social media is inauthentic. It is fake. It's false. It is a filter. It is a isolated portion of somebody's life that is the joyous picture of all the happy things they did when they were on vacation, or the beautiful scenery that they saw. But most people filter out the dark, the ugly, the less than flattering, and so we get this skewed picture that's not authentic. And so one of the ways that we can, I think, combat this and strive to be less influenced by this is to be more authentic in our own lives, to try to, do things that foster more authenticity in ourselves, in our conversations, in our interactions with other people. That's all I got so far. Thanks for tuning in. What else would you say? What else would you add to that list? I know there's more. Tell me. Illuminate. Thanks for tuning in.